Need entertainment. And
Jij bent zometeen €100.000 rijker, dus zorg ervoor dat je een doel hebt. Hoi.
Goedendag, Kranenberg.
Hallo. Ah, kijk.
Eerst in Nederland.
Ja?
Hij is een paar maanden oud. Volgens mij staat er 6 kilometer op de teller.
Als je over 2 weken bent, 92.000. Contant. Top. Om je geld onbezeerbaar te innen, heb je money mules nodig, oftewel geldezen. Ik wil een hele buitenhand vraag voor je. Heb je zo'n geld verdienen?
Ja hoor.
Ja? Wil je pinpas kopen voor jou?
Oh nee, dat gaat hem niet worden.
Nou, wat heb je op je rekening staan?
De 20.
20? Geef ik jou €250 voor je pas en je pincode. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Zie je hem? Zet die in je zak. Zie. Voel het even. Zet je even de pincode op. Is €200. Alsjeblieft. Oké, nu gaat het allerleukste werk beginnen. En dat is het vullen van deze rekening. Ik heb er 1000 tegelijk opgekocht. Dat zijn dus PC's waarvan we vanaf hier heel makkelijk in kunnen. Hier, op Facebook, handig.
Meneer Jansen?
Ja, goedemiddag meneer. U spreekt met Hendrik Keizer van de Rabobank.
Ja.
Meneer, we hebben de laatste paar dagen een kleine storing ontvangen in ons systeem. Ik weet niet of u daar wat over heeft gehoord.
Ja.
Heeft u heel toevallig een calculator bij de hand? Als u voor mij eventjes dan wil inloggen.
Ja.
Als het goed is verschijnt er nu een code bij u in beeld. Is dit 87920966? Oh, dat klopt niet. Maar wat voor code heeft u wel staan? Wat staat daar? 65
23
23
94.
Dan ga ik dat eventjes invoeren en snel voor u resetten. Dan kunt u nog een code meteen erachteraan doen. En dan zijn we al bijna klaar. Dat is 1500. Ja, heel goed. Hartstikke bedankt voor uw tijd. Bent u mevrouw Gilsen?
Ja, dat ben ik.
Ik spreek met Mark de Bruin van de ING. Heeft u heel toevallig een calculator bij de hand? Als het goed is heeft u nu een berichtje binnengekregen van mij. Ja. 643 425. Dan mag u nu op opnemen.
Oké.
Ja, dat is gebeurd.
Ja, dat is gebeurd.
Mevrouw, was dat voor de rest helemaal op? Na het harde werk is het altijd goed om even goed je rust te pakken. Wat hebben we nodig? Portable router. Daarmee maak je de gratis wifi aan. Geef je een betrouwbare naam. Hier, Café Kap. Mensen gaan dan denken, hé, dat is betrouwbaar, dat is gratis. En die gaan er direct op. Alsjeblieft. Met Wireshark zie je wie er inlogt. En dan kun je sniffen aanvallen. Hoppa. La laptop van Marlies. Kijk hier. Daar zit ze. Blond. Hallo Marlies. Wacht. Kort. Oh, heel lijst. Hier de code van de creditcard. En de creditcard ligt daar op tafel. Oh, wauw.
How long? Not long! Cause what you reap is what you sow!
We hebben nu €15.000. We gaan nu geld verdienen. We gaan naar Oekraïne. Hoi. De Ukrainiërs. Yep. Het is heel makkelijk. Een klein vliegveldje. En de anderen ook een klein vliegveldje. Dus het is moeilijk met paspoort en de baan. Excellent. Nou, daar zijn we. Right there. Say hi to the camera.
we can't watch movies. We have a session to do, right? So let's swap from that into this. I did it. Well, hi guys. I guess most of the people in this room did watch the previous sessions we did in this series of 3. So we did one on protection, one on detection, and now we're down to response. So this session is going to be a little bit more of a discussion and a live demo. We're going to talk a little bit about our experiences in doing response. And if you never met us before, if you're new in this room, then my name is Marcus Murray. I am leading a team of people doing penetration testing, incident response, and other things. And we have done big investigations, everything from Cloud Hopper, big international investigations, down to smaller things, with everything from CEO scams down to real targeted attacks. Basically, I've seen everything. And it's interesting because it's really picking up. We used to have like maybe 5, 10 investigations a year. Now we can do that full time all day long. Especially talking about the visibility people get from like ransomware attacks when they're supposed to be noticeable. So it's really picking up. Business is good. My colleague here, Hasain, is one of the cool guys in the team.
Thank you. My name is Alshakarti. The incident response is actually the best thing I know in terms of doing an assignment at the customer side. That's as interesting and as awesome it could get. I mean, putting your finger on the real cause, finding all these activities is the most awesome thing that can ever happen.
Yeah, we actually spent like New Year's and Christmases together doing incident response with customers. So it's,
Yeah.
It is very much fun, I think, sometimes. So anyhow, this session is not going to be so formal. We're going to have discussions, do some live drawings, and then basically do an investigation live using some tools and techniques just to give you an insight in what it looks like from this perspective. Also, we want to share some experiences from customers. But it's pretty obvious why you need incident response. I would like for you guys to understand how many times there should have been an investigation that never took place. And that's the typical big reason we should talk about incident response and the importance of that. Many of the times where we have come into an environment is not because of the first wave when someone broke in and did the bad things. Many times when we come into the environment, that's when a second or third wave, when sometimes even not even the same group that did the first attack are in there, they may have sold that access to someone else. So years later, someone is slobby and they get noticed because they're so slobby, so we get brought in and then we find a lot of things that could have been found much earlier. And what's interesting about that is many times they had some kind of indication. When you ask them about this time, and you go back, sometimes they have antivirus logs. They had some malware on some system that was a part of the attack. But the only thing they did was cleaned up the malware. They didn't do an investigation. They didn't understand the need for response. So we talked about protection earlier today. We talked about detection. Now we're going to talk about how do you think when it comes to response and what tools are you going to use. And one thing that strikes you is the better your detection capabilities is, the better your response will be. So if you don't have detection, if you don't have logging and things like that, it's going to be very tough to do response. It's very different when an immature customer calls us and say, hey, we have something happening in the environment, and we go there and there is no logging. Then it's really hard to do the response. Sometimes they ask the obvious questions. What did they exfiltrate? And then you realize there are no firewall logs. There's nothing monitoring traffic. So sometimes it's impossible to answer that question. And that's a really good learning for them, because afterwards they really invest in understanding this. So they are intertwined, they're interconnected, detect and response in many ways. And of course, if you're going to do response, you need to be able to do investigations targeting everything from servers, user devices, internal systems, high-value targets and things like that. And I'm going to do back. I talked a little bit about one attack we investigated last year, and I'm going to go back to that a little bit. So this is an attack that was executed or believed to be executed by 3PLA, the People Liberation Army of China. The reason we know that is because they have a modus operandi and they have different tools. Some of the tools used inside this campaign is only known to be used by this organization. You can actually map, if you have the right Excel spreadsheets, you can actually map threat actors. So these are, for example, Chinese threat actor groups. These are Russian, North Koreans, Iranians, Israeli, Middle East, NATO, others, whatever. But this is Chinese threat actor groups. So PLA is People Liberation Army of China. They're called different names by different antivirus vendors or things like that. And this is a pretty current document, actually. But you can see here that the different groups are known to be using different tools. And they have different targets, and they have different reasons and different methodology. So by following that, you can link them to, for example, using this plug X that was used in this case. So there is a threat intelligence going on in this world where we share information about who is using what. It's kind of interesting. These Chinese people, they also like another tool called Poison Ivy. And I'm proud to say that because that's made by Swedish people. It's getting very much outdated now, but still. Other tools are here also, even tools that we have produced, which is kind of annoying sometimes in my company, Trusek. So anyhow, with this knowledge, we kind of realized it was a server here that was compromised, a jump server in their environment. And this code that we found was actually plug X. So we could see that using reverse engineering. But there are a lot of learnings from this. First of all, when we did this investigation, the company who asked us to help them, they got the information from a third party. So they didn't find this themselves. They got contacted by someone that has a good understanding of what's happening in this country and this world. But they said, you have malware on that internal server. They could basically say that because they were running connections to a known command and control server. So what do you think they asked us? Do you think they asked us, can you please come here and do a great investigation? Or do you think they asked us, can you please come here because there is obviously a malware on the server and our antivirus can't find it, so can you help us delete it? Yeah, that's basically what they said. And that's very normal. Because it's kind of awkward not to be able to detect something that you know you're there. So we came in, we looked at that, we realized it was plug X, and we said, you're hit by a nation-state threat actor. So there should be an investigation for sure. When we started to do the investigation, it was kind of interesting because they were using a large external provider for their IT infrastructure. So they were outsourced basically. Large organization, but they were outsourced. So the big infrastructure vendor was of course informed. What do you think they did? Well, they brought in their own investigation team. With a pretty famous investigator and his team, they came in. And we were also already doing an investigation. And they said, can we please join groups? Can we work together? And we said, no. It feels awkward, and these are good learnings, to have the infrastructure provider doing an investigation. How you don't know if they are somehow, involved in the problem or something. I mean, they may not represent the best interest of their customer. What if weaknesses are found? So maybe it's their problem. They're part of the reason for this to happen. So we refused that. So we started up 2 similar investigations at the same time. And this is going to get pretty dirty, actually. Not dirty in the bad way or in the wrong way, sorry. But what happened was, we found evidence that this organization was basically completely compromised. We're going to show you a little bit about how to do this investigation later. But another thing, when you do an investigation, first of all, you want to see how did this system, if you have one system infected, how did it get infected? And where did the attack start? You look for something we call patient zero. Where did it start? Why did they come in the first place? And then, of course, you want to see where did they go later, so you want to create a timeline so you can visualize the entire event happening. What was funny is this jump server that was infected was actually the jump server used by the infrastructure provider. So they had admin access going into their own jump server, jumping from that one into their customer. Actually, they used jump infrastructure into all other customers. And we realized that this is a one-direction connection. You cannot connect from the client to the vendor. You can only connect from the vendor to the client. Simple firewall rules. Otherwise, you would break the entire multi-tenancy security. So when that one was infected, of course, we started to put interest in what happened on the other side. They really didn't want to give us access to that, but after some investigation, we realized that we could prove that the other jump server inside the vendor was compromised. After pushing the other team, they admitted that they didn't admit that they knew, but they admitted that they had other customer that was also infected. And they unofficially admitted to me personally that they knew that they were infected. They just didn't know how much. The problem here is pretty complex. Not only did they not tell the customer that they were the reason for the infection, they also sold investigation to them by the hour. So they made money by infecting them. Another thing that they did, and this is true, when they made the investigation report, they obviously realized that things happening here happened before they happened here. So they started to make a report where they actually wrote in the report that this is probably time stomping. They probably changed the time. We believe that it happened here first and then went backwards here, even though it's not even physically possible. And I asked the guy, this semi-famous dude, training people in investigations, he's internationally recognized. I asked him, I really want to say his name, but I'm not going to do that. I said, hey, man, why do you do this? He said, well, Marcus, between you and me, it's the lawyers. The lawyers force me to do everything I can to make sure that there are no unnecessary evidence that they can tie us to this, because they can sue us for a lot of money. And I said, okay, but how can you live with yourself? His reply was simple. I've done this for so long, I don't feel anything anymore. During our investigations, we found IOCs, indicators of compromise, that we delivered to them, which made them realize that they had more customers infected through them. I don't think, honestly from my heart, that any of the other customers that are getting infected knows that it was done by that vendor, or the vendor was the platform that infected them. I think they honestly are now selling detect and response to them because of that incident. Because their solution was, let's bring in a team, let's recommend you better security for the future. So they were selling solutions. That was a business case for them. They made money by infecting their customers. So having an understanding of response gets pretty obvious when you listen to a store, right? You need to have some kind of competency so you can not just rely on whoever comes in. You need to understand it. Another key learning when we do these investigations is usually with a customer, you need to be prepared for incident response. Typically they call us, especially when they outsource, they say, hey, Trusek, we're trying to get our heads around this. We can't, so can you please do an investigation for us? And then we say, okay, can you please give us high privs so we can now extract data from this environment? And they say, sure. And then they contact the outsourcing partner and say, hey, Trusic needs to be domain admins for a certain amount of time. Yeah, don't go there with domain admins. But anyhow. And then they say, no, we're not going to let Trusic in there. They're going to, I mean, they're not saying it, but they're afraid we're going to find stuff that can somehow show their weaknesses or the errors they did. So it usually takes 2-3 days before we get access, because lawyers are talking to each other. And then normally we get access and then we do the job. But they can lose 48 plus hours just because they don't have a process in place. They don't have the negotiations with the suppliers and vendors. So it's already, set up for an investigation. So these are important learnings that you can kind of embrace. And another thing, most of them don't have detection. So in the other session we showed you, and we're going to show some more of that, we showed some typical things you can do when you have logging in your environment. If you have a CM solution, you can do extensive searches. We're going to run a large demo here, doing an investigation. But what happens when you don't have anything, when they're not logging? So I think this is good food for thought. When people call us and they say, we know we have an infected system here, or we have been told that we have an infected system, or we know that this machine must be compromised because the data on that machine is now on the internet. We say two things directly. Okay, before you do anything else, make a snapshot of the memory and take the disk, the state right now. Do not turn it off. It can be a memory-resistant attack. So take the memory and the disk. That's, if you just realize that, then you haven't spoiled anything when we come in. And just to give you an example where you can find in memory, this is volatility, a simple tool. And I'm not going to do a big investigation here, but let's say we have an infected computer. This is an infected system called infected. It's no Windows 7, but this is actually code from a real attack once upon a time. So now I'm taking a net scan. I'm actually going to filter for established. It's going to be faster. Of course. I'm going to do it this way. My God. What the freak. Infected member established. Good. I have a strange keyboard. I don't have the pipe. So this is faster. So I see an established connection. So this was infected, and I can see at the time of infection, I'm making this simple so everybody can see. So I filtered out some other things from memory. But it's interesting to see this is memory. So by just checking the memory of this machine, I can actually get commands that are similar to what you would have if you were running it live. So these are netstats, but just extracted from memory. So everything that you can do that is stored inside the computer, you can still see in memory. So using this simple technique, we could see that this infected computer actually had an established connection to this other system, and it connected to port 445. Why was that important in this investigation? Well, that was a domain controller. So an infected system had a connection to the domain controller. What was more interesting is when we did an interrogation, we asked the people, knowing what that computer did, they said that there was no reason for that one to make connection to the main controller unless, of course, there was a log on in the morning or a GP update or something like that. But it's not some system where you normally just connect. So it could be legit, but it didn't necessarily have to be legit. So we needed to do the investigation further. And I'm just going to show you the simplest of tricks that will just tell you the power of looking into memory. So looking at the memory, it takes some time, so I just piped the result of this command to a file. But this is looking through memory on that machine currently then. And then you see inside the memory that there are actually, someone took hashes away from that machine. So someone must have ran Mimikatz or something to take hashes, because if you can read this, there's a username, current, this is the read number, and then there is the hash. So someone did a hash dump and they stored it in the clipboard for some reason. It's just a typical thing that you could, if you're lucky, find. And another thing, looking further ahead, you could see not just a clipboard, but you can actually see last command, CMD. Let's see, it's faster this way, I think. Clipboard. Infected, no, not scan. Okay. I think it's just CMD. Let's see. Not DC. Bear with me, it's not easy to be old. I remember what it was to be young. That was not easy either, by the way. So, what I'm aiming for here is the last commands, the last known commands. I think it's CMD, but I'm not sure. Nope. But I will find that very shortly. I have another solution. Type volatility. Last commands is CMD scan, of course. CMD scan. But what's interesting here is the fact that you can usually see a lot of things that you don't normally look for. So in this infected computer, we could actually see that they were doing PSexec to the server. They were using credentials. They were actually using one of our tools that was not a bit awkward, but they were. So gsec dump is a tool to extract credentials like Mimikatz is today. So by checking memory, we could find a lot of things. So that's another key learning. When you don't have the monitoring and detection tools in place, you can still look through the things you do have. And one of those is memory. So again, lots of learnings from this attack. But let's go over to Hasain, and then we're gonna do a real investigation when you have some logging in the environment to see what you can do then. And this demo is gonna be with free tools, with Sysmon, and with the ELK stack. So Sysmon is a Microsoft tool, and the ELK stack is a free open source tool, unless you want to buy the commercial version. But the free one is good enough for enterprise grade CM storage and investigations.
Okay, good. So as said, the system was monitored using the Sysmon, just like the thing we showed in the last session. And we will start digging into those details Sysmon is showing. So you can obviously work with this interface. If you want to process a lot of information in the ELK stack, you can as well work with scripting. Working with this Python script, for instance, you can connect to the ELK stack and start processing information a bit more efficiently. So the first step we will be doing is that we will be looking at connections being made to specific destination IP addresses. Why is that? Well, we got some information. We got hinted about these things, right? So starting from that point and start looking at these things. So I will simply just execute this Python script just to get that information. And then I'm ending up with a pretty good list of connections being made. As you can see here, we see clearly or directly what process is making these connections. It's PowerShell exe that was communicating with these addresses. So what we need to do from this step to the next one is that we just pick the GUID value that is assigned to any of these events. This is, because of Sysmon, the way Sysmon works and it's configured, this is going to be unique for that process across time. So I can use this GUID to identify other activities that process has been doing, not just this particular network connection. So I can go forth and back in time and see what else is related to that guy. So just to give you another example of that, we have some pre-cooked things. We can just run the same thing and start focusing on a specific client and that GUID value, right? So once again, just for automation. So we need to process a bit bigger, larger amount of data. This is maybe a more efficient way. So what we're seeing here says, hey, that client, that particular machine with this GUID, so obviously that process, and give me background information about this. So what we're collecting here is, you see at the top, this is the PowerShell process, and this is how it was started. The PowerShell exe with the encoded command appears there. So this is that process we're looking at. And then every other process that is related to that process, either sub or parent. In this case, that script particularly looking for parent processes.
So basically, you have a machine making strange connections, and now you're looking into what processes were running those connections.
So we see the parent process that started the PowerShell exe is actually the W script. This is the Windows script engine, the Java VB script. Obviously, we were calling on a local file in this location. This is a JS file. So this is probably a downloader or something like that. So a user clicked this somehow. If you look at the path, you see it's in app data, local temp. That's very classic for something being extracted automatically in the temp folder or downloaded automatically and ending up in the temp folder. It's not the temporary internet files. This is the regular user temp. So this is probably somebody opening something, maybe a zip file or something like that, and then clicking, viewing that content of that one, and it's get automatically extracted to give you the ability to see that.
So key learnings here. If you have data stored and you have the tools, you can do searches, then you can start modeling that data to see what happened. And with the experience of just understanding, for example, that this is a temp folder of a user, then you can track it down to, okay, this is something happening in that user context.
We do have the indication on the top here that it was that particular user that was running that process. So we do have that information. We get it even more verified that it was in that user profile, right? So we can just keep following these tracks. And the parent process to that Windows scripting host execution was obviously the explorer.exe. So we are probably within an interactive session. That user was logged on somewhere on that machine.
So let's put this in context. The police calls your organization and they say, you have connections to that IP. Now you search that IP, you find this computer. This is the one making the connections. That will only work if you have firewall logs or something similar, so you can connect the internal addresses to the external or proxy logs. But that's where we are right now. You need to picture that in order to understand this. We didn't know at the time of the investigation anything more than that. Now we need to find out what happened afterwards.
So this is the complete process tree, and automated tools such as ATP will give you that process tree printed out without any trouble. So this is how we do it with manual actions. So let's go from here. We identified that PowerShell. Anybody interested in decoding that one? You can do that as well, if that's the case. Let's go ahead and take it. Put it in any base64 decoder of your choice. So just decode. Just to understand what's going on. This is a good thing to do. Whenever you're doing an investigation, you want to say, okay, it was downloading this file from that location.
Yeah. And if you're doing a real investigation, you may not use a public base64 decoder. It could be something interesting there. So
of course,
you would use it locally.
Use local tools.
Yeah, good
we
for
don't
them.
have anything to lose right now, so that's fine. So then you can, obviously, the next step will be very interesting in that particular file. I would go download or try to fetch that file to understand what's going on. So you will be doing that as well. Okay. Good. So let's proceed from that point now to the next step. So the next step will be, I do have a computer name. I do have a destination IP address of interest. I know they were grabbing that information from that host. So I want to identify what else. What else did communicate with that thingy? So I will do this search in the ELK stack.
Again, free tools.
So this is what I'm ending up with, and I will be going ahead and adding some more information to this. So I will be filtering specifically on Event ID 15. That's a file stream, so there are certain different Event IDs for when a file gets created, etc. So I'm interested in what files were created. How was the file system altered when this happened? whilst that process was running. And I will show the target file name, obviously. So we'll go ahead and add these fields. So let's go from there, add a filter. So we do the event ID.
Equals 1.
And it's 15, right? So we save that. You see, Kibana will start offering you, okay, I see in the set you're receiving, the resulting set, these other fields are available. So what if I add the file name to that
the
list?
popular ones. But
So I see, okay, then this is the timeline. It's always ordered by the time and the timestamp. And I see what files were created in relationship to that event. So most interesting will be these guys, the phishing.zip and then the picture.zip. And you see this zone identifier, this alternate stream going on here. This is a very good indication that this was downloaded by a tool like a web browser or something from an external location. This is not just a file share or local drive.
yeah.
Okay?
So the time will tell. Sometimes, a millisecond after you open this file, then the JavaScript appears in the temp folder. So time will really help you to understand the connection between this.
And then we can, of course, start correlating these values to each other. So I have when the processes were executing and running, and I have when the files were creating. So we can try to put together these different things. To cross-reference that with the external connections, of course, I can go back to my script, the external connections, and just look at the times once again. So I have two different pictures. I need to just do a cross-referencing in between and see, okay, that process started at that time, and the file was just downloaded a couple of seconds before, maybe. Somebody double-clicked what they believe was a picture, a JPEG file maybe, but in real life, this was a JavaScript that was executing with the Windows scripting host engine. So this is something we need to go back and forth and just start comparing these things together. So if we go to the next step, we try to identify, okay, that there should be an agent, something running on this machine, right? So if somebody downloaded code and got executed automatically, there should be something more running on this machine. It's not just that PowerShell. So let's do another search for that GUID. And we will do some other filtering on that one. So let's go here. I need to clear or remove those filters, and then remove some of the fields, and then do another. There we go. So going back to this, and I will be adding the other columns like parent process GUID and the command line. So the parent process GUID, there we go. And I want to see the command line that was executed in relationship to that. So part of that PowerShell context, that PowerShell process that was executed by whatever agent binary the user clicked on, we see these processes or these commands were issued. Who am I? Host name, who am I? And there is a net use. Somebody is going and connecting to a SQL server. For what reason? How come they know that SQL server? That's a different discussion. But we see clearly within that session, these commands were executed. So this is all just Sysmon looking at this and monitoring and gluing these different events together so I can have this type of tracking going on.
And it's a big difference in doing the investigation, realizing now they're connecting to the SQL server, as opposed to say, well, there was a JavaScript running, let's remove the JavaScript and go on with our lives.
And then you don't know that that SQL server was compromised. So that's probably a lot of the answers for, okay, what kind of information did we lose? What did they do in our environment? Well, if we have this type of logging, then we can give you those answers. If we don't,
Yeah.
we can maybe guess something, but yeah,
But again, there are other tricks. This could have been found in memory or somewhere else, depending on your skill sets and
So
where
that
it's there.
definitely interesting. The way Marcus described, you will go about doing memory snapshots, disk snapshots. You will go back to your records and archives in terms of backups, backup files from those systems. You want to be sure to save that information as well. And we talked about this during the break. Take those backups you have from the file system, run through, generate hash files or hashes for those files, and keep those timestamps and import that into your ELK stack. Because you will be able to search through these files as well. Sysmon is actually keeping MD5s and SHA-256 hashes for all files it encounters. So that's a good thing. So we did figure out what commands we're executing. So let's check what happened within more of it from the network connection side within that process. So we go back and redo this search again. So now we are not searching the parent process GUID. We're searching within that particular process, and we'll be looking more at the network traffic. So let's go back there again, and then we don't have any filter going on here. So doing that search. And then I would remove the command line and the process and adding the destination port and the destination IP address to this. So this is now identifying what kind of communication was going on or towards whom. This is my client, the time the communication started. And I will see a lot of communication was obviously going to the command and control center. I need to filter that out because that's noise. I know it's communicating more or less always with that command and control center. So I will be filtering that out, all communication and that. So I will add another filter over here. So event. And then the destination IP is not the 172.16.10.189. And now I'm getting the unique ones, the real ones that I should bother about. So this is not the CC server, this is everything else that process was initiating communication to. So I know they were doing something with the SQL server. If the SQL server is any of that, then I can exclude that and go on and keep looking and see what other systems were affected by this. So take it from there to the next step and start looking further and deeper into that. So something we can do that we can check for network connections. So we say this computer at all, event ID, this is for network connections, this IP address and these ports. So let's just do that, just give you another example. Zooming out. Removing those specific filters and then doing another search. So these are all the records related to that client. I will just remove these additional fields. I want to have the event ID filtering, and I want to have the destination not set to that. And maybe filter on some interesting services like 445. This is regular SMB, right? In a modern Windows environment. So I can just try to figure out, did they do any SMB-based access anywhere else? So I will add the event ID, which is set to 3. So here you can go on and add more and more filters. And the other one I needed to have is the event data. Destination IP is not set to 172.16.10.189, right? This is the command and control center. So everything else may be going specifically, but let's see what we're getting there. So I will narrow this down. I don't want to see everything going on here. I just want to see the IP address and the port number in question. So these are the other systems these processes were communicating with. The 199, oh, sorry. Sometimes we need to redo the search. Nope. Okay, yeah, I know what that is.
Thieves get away.
Sometimes we need to remember that, okay, when you start digging very, very much into this, the elk stack will actually narrow down the time frame. As much as we're going, it will adjust the time frame. So I need to, from time to time, go back and then tell it, hey, please give me everything you got. I want to have the whole data set available. Okay. So it's still working on it. There we go. So I got to see now all the other IP addresses this was communicating with. Obviously, a whole lot of that with the port 80, the command and control center. Let's go back and filter that out. Oops, we did it again. There we go. So destination IP is not set to 172.16. Right? And it's searching. And there we go. So we now start seeing some other protocols or other TCP destination ports. 88 is obviously Kerberos, right? So we started identifying what other machines were involved in that at that particular moment in that process. What else did they do? What else did they communicate with? Some RPC connections, some Kerberos connections, etc. were going on. Then we keep digging and see where those systems affected that 172.16.10.40. What is that for a system? And how affected was that one? And we just keep digging into that. So we just keep filtering things out. Another very interesting to look at, now we don't really know whether there were any persistency or not. We're just seeing the attack at the time it occurred, right? So that was somebody run the PowerShell, that JavaScript thingy, it resulting in running a PowerShell process. They are connecting to some system, but is there any WMI persistency or WMI activity? Because that's another interesting thing attackers are relying on. PowerShell is one, WMI is another. Just using the built-in tools just to blend into the environment, not to drawing any attention to themselves or their activities, so just using whatever the platform provides. So I can go ahead and start looking for that particular one. That's a standard location for WMI process in a Windows system. So let's remove all the filters altogether, remove all the columns, and then we start from scratch again. So this is now showing everything related to that particular process. You can always go here and just start looking at what's going on here. So I see that there is an event data image. There is an executable that was PowerShell, was related to this somehow. The parent image was WMI. So WMI actually executed PowerShell. That's interesting. This could be illegal activity. This could be something scheduled, remote command, job, etc. going on. Or this could be something of interest. I probably need to dig more into that one. So just bring the other things together. Just start focusing on the other, some of these details. The computer name, parent image, command line, GUID, etc. And then we should see all the shells, all the commands, everything going on here. So let's do that. I will collapse that one, add the filters. So I wanted to have the command line, right? No, sorry, I want to have these columns. So before going the filtering on this. So I want to have the command lines. I want to have the parent image. That's the executable that was running, and the process GUID, so I can do any tracing and tracking on that one. So you see here? So through WMI, somebody was actually executing remote PowerShell pretty similar to the way they did it at the entry point. So that shows the lateral movement step. That shows eventually persistency.
Yeah, and what they're doing. You can show what they're doing right now.
So what are they doing? Then we just copy that and then decode it likewise we did the last time. This was actually the same thing. So this is exactly the same. So they are downloading.
That showed you nice, that one too.
Yeah, and then there was a different one, right? Coming down here. So this is a bit different.
But you can see that they took the SAM hives. Why would you do that?
Yeah, that's a SAM hive extraction and a system hive extraction. Anybody can come up with a good explanation?
To me, that's very obvious what they're doing. Anyone knows? Yeah, they're taking the local passwords from registry, and they need a system hive to get the decryption key.
So obviously the other PowerShell command was about extract LSA SS creds PS1.
Normally you're not as lucky, so they actually name the file, what they're doing. But normally, if this is a live attack, you can just go there and download it yourself. So that's a typical follow-up.
And this is not the whole story. We got some truncated text over here. So they saved that to a file and then actually did an upload at the same time. So this was like grab and upload.
Yeah. But the extract creds, that's PowerShell running in memory. They're running PowerShell directly. They're not installing a Mimikatz exe or something. So it's typical. This is a typical real-world attack. We just reproduced it in our systems.
So
it's exactly what we saw in a case.
These things are very nice indication of compromised attacks. I can take that and start searching for that particular encoded string in the whole data set. So wherever it occurs, then I know that machine was visited or tampered with by somebody. Okay, so I just keep records of everything I'm observing, everything I'm seeing, to be able to just go back and search on a broader scale. I want to see everything else that was affected by the same type of scenario. And then from there, probably figure out what was really going on. And then we can keep digging into this, see what the parent command was, etc. So I will just go ahead from that on the SQL, tracking that on the SQL server, then I need to go back to that process and keep looking there. Okay. So let's see if we just show the computer name over here. Yeah, you see, these are actually coming from, not from that client anymore. These are from the SQL server, right? That was logged using sysmon as well. So now I know that they are related to each other. I started from the client. All the indications were from the client. And then I had ended up in the SQL server and started observing what's going on the SQL server this time. Because the only difference in here was actually the client double-clicked the JavaScript file. On the SQL server, they were running through WMI. Otherwise, they were running the same sets of tools. It was the same PowerShell script that initiated the whole thing for me. And I can go ahead and dig further, and then we just repeat that process on and on again until we hopefully figure out every single machine that was visited by the attackers.
Yeah. So what can you learn from that? Well, this is what it looks like in the real world. But it gives you an understanding of the knowledge you need in order to be able to do a forensic investigation. And sometimes I have one example of one customer. They were informed actually by the police that they had the risk of malware. It was an investigation. They found a They found malware being sent in emails to them. So they didn't know if it executed or not. And then they were contacted by the police and said, do an investigation of this. So they did an investigation, but this dude did it himself. He was not a forensic expert, but he downloaded volatility and he did some fun stuff. And then a year later, they realized that this was actually a big intrusion. We were called in, and we asked him, did you write a report? Do you have from your investigation? No, there was no report. He never did it. What did you do? I don't really remember. Do you have the memory still? No, I don't have the memory anymore. I mean, it's really hard. So just some learnings in order to be able to be prepared when something happens. You need to have some kind of incident organization. You need to actually have people that knows what to do when something happens. You need to have accurate system inventory. That's another thing. When we come to big customers with like 15,000 computers, 25,000 computers, and then they say, oh, that computer has been infected, and we realize that these 10 computers were infected. Okay, so what are they? And in a big enough environment, they don't know, or they may have an inventory system, but sometimes it's not accurate. So they believe it's a SQL server, but the same server name is now doing something different. So that really makes it hard to understand the severity. Did they breach a SQL server, or was it something very different? Same thing with network diagrams. They're almost never accurate. So we usually need to do our own mapping again. That's time consuming. And of course, you realize when you do the investigation that you need to have all these different logs. When you don't have them, it's really difficult. But by understanding this and seeing the example he did, if you log this stuff, then you can actually find the data. And last but not least, accessing credentials for the investigation. If you cannot give an investigator the right credentials, or if you have an internal discussion before you give the forensic dude what he needs, then you lose time. That's prepare. Then during the investigation, you realize that it's kind of challenging. You need not only to have forensic skills, you need to be able to run this as a project. Especially if it's going to be, you're going to involve the police later. If you don't collect the evidence, you log them correctly, a finding gets an ID in some kind of system, even though it's a manual system, it's going to be very hard to show exactly what you investigated and how and what the evidence were. So you need to have understanding of incident projects. Network forensic skills, of course. If you don't have people that knows how to do forensics, please bring someone in. Otherwise, you're going to miss things for sure. Just seeing Hasain's small demo, it is pretty technical, right? And you need to have experience. And that's another learning from when we do the red team exercises. We attack some of the largest banks and financial institutes and government organizations. We infect them, we compromise them, we take over the high-value targets. They don't know what's going on. Sometimes we get detected, and they start an internal investigation. Many of those have SOCs and CERTs, Security Operations Centers and CERT team. So they do an investigation. And what's interesting is they find something. They may find a phishing attack and us doing something. But in a red team, we come in different waves and we do different things. So they actually present the report with us in the room. They don't even know this is a simulated attack. They think it's a real attack. So we and others are in the room. They present the report and then we say, okay, yes, you know, this was an exercise. This is what really happened. And that you never have that luxury in the real world when it's a real threat actor. So we actually show them exactly what we did. And it's usually somewhere around 5 to 30% of what we did that they actually found. And after that, we have SOC trimming and SOC training and CERT trimming and CERT training. Then we teach them exactly how they can find what we did, and next time they know. So there were evidence. They could potentially have found everything, but they didn't. And you know what the biggest reason is? When you're an internal CERT or internal SOC, how many big investigations do you ever do? You don't really practice. Usually they have never done a big investigation in the real world before. They took all the trainings, but they never really did it. So it's a great learning experience doing the red team, and then they have to act and practice doing investigations, and we trim them. But this is how hard this is. So of course you need the skills. Not only network skills, you need reverse engineering skills if you want to know what the malware is doing. You need platform skills, of course, you need to understand. You can't just send a forensic guy in there. You need to understand Active Directory, host, the applications you're using, all that stuff. And this is another last part of this process that many people forget and don't understand. When you have a threat actor hacking your environment, and then you do the investigation and you say, now I know what happened, then you want to get rid of them, right? People actually miss this part. They delete the malware and then it's done. They don't really know if they're out. Did they compromise all their credentials or not? Can they come back? So the kick-out process is pretty tough. We close all the vulnerabilities and remove the hardware. We monitor for activity. We always recommend if they compromise the domain, we're talking about a full password reset, for example. Every user must have a password reset, recommendedly by the same day. And if you're an organization of 10,000, do you know how hard that is if you don't have the processes in place? Just imagine.
Especially speaking about the service accounts and that kind of special accounts existing.
So we've done investigations where we know the threat actor took the entire domain, and months later they didn't manage to change the damn passwords. In reality, that's how important it is to be prepared. So the kick-out process is about closing the vulnerabilities, removing the hardware, and then you have to monitor for the threat actor not to come back. So after that, we sit for weeks and really monitor. Are there any new suspicious connections? Is there any DNS activity related to this threat actor, this modus operandi? Any network connections made internally or to the internet? Are those stolen credentials being used in a fashion that we're not sure they're authorized? So the kick-out process is very important. So by that, guys, I think the time is up. And thank you so much. Many of you guys have been listening for 3 straight sessions. I hope that you found some new things to think about in terms of security. This is a lot about awareness, understanding the need for response. It's really hard to teach someone all the aspects in 1 hour. I'll give you credit for that. But just seeing is believing. So these demos by Hasain, I think they kind of give you an insight into this world. And I think that's important. Just by seeing that, you understand what you need in order to be able to do this. Skills, tools, all that stuff. So by that, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, guys.
We're not going to run away, so if you have some questions, we can talk over here or something. And enjoy Tech Days.